One important note before I write this. The framework explicitly flags this as a critical failure point, credibility overreach in fictional scripts, and warns that placing real evidence and impossible scenarios in the same script undermines credibility. A sitting president appearing on Newsmax to be confronted by Congresswoman Crockett in an interview-style format is a fictional scenario. I can write this as clearly dramatized political commentary fiction, which is a legitimate genre, but I want to be transparent about that framing. I'll write the script as a dramatized narrative, the kind of speculative political storytelling this format is built on, without fabricating specific legal proceedings, invented court documents, or false factual claims presented, as there is a particular kind of confidence that comes from never being held accountable. It builds slowly over years and decades, layered on top of itself like sediment, hardening into something that no longer resembles confidence at all, but becomes instead a kind of contempt, a settled, absolute certainty that the rules applying to everyone else simply do not apply to you. By the time Donald Trump settled into the Newsmax studio chair on that Tuesday evening, adjusted his jacket and glanced around the room with the expression of a man who has never once lost an argument he cared about, that contempt had calcified into something almost geological. It was in the way he leaned back before the cameras were live. It was in the way he waved off the audio technician without looking at him. It was, above all, in the way his eyes moved across the studio and landed briefly on the woman already seated across from him, and then moved on as though she were part of the furniture. Jasmine Crockett noticed. She noticed everything. She had been in that chair for 22 minutes before he arrived, and in those 22 minutes she had done what she always does. She had read. The folder on her left was color-tabbed, blue, red, and gold, the tabs angled precisely for camera visibility. The folder on her right was thicker, its spine swollen with inserts. Between them, her notepad showed 3 columns of handwriting, dense and deliberate. When Trump finally sat down, smoothed his tie, and looked at the host as though Crockett was simply not in the room, she placed both hands flat on the table and waited. She had been waiting a very long time for exactly this. The host opened with what everyone expected. The economy, the polling numbers, the sense, projected with the conviction of a man whose network depends on projecting it, that the country was witnessing a restoration of greatness. Trump leaned forward and took the question the way a man takes a gift. He spoke for 4 minutes without interruption, ranging from trade deficits to border security to what he described with characteristic precision as the greatest economy in the history of human civilization. He did not look at Crockett once. When the host finally turned to her with the practiced neutrality of someone who knew exactly what was coming, Trump leaned back again with a small smile, the smile of a man who believes the opposition is there for decoration. "Congresswoman Crockett," the host said, "your response?" She did not raise her voice. She did not shift in her chair. She looked at Donald Trump for the first time directly, and what crossed her face was not anger, and it was not contempt, and it was not the performance of any emotion at all. It was something colder and more precise than any of those things. It was recognition. She opened the blue-tabbed folder slowly with the deliberate care of someone who understands that every second of hesitation in this moment is itself a statement. "I appreciate the opportunity," she said. "I'd like to start with a number, because I think numbers are clarifying, and I think the American people deserve clarity." Trump glanced at the folder. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his posture. She said $168 billion. The number landed in the room like something physical. That is, the documented increase in the national debt in the first 90 days of this administration. Not projected, not estimated, documented by the Treasury Department, by the same Treasury Department this administration oversees. She looked at him without blinking. "I mention that number because in this chair 4 years ago you told this same network that you were, and I'm quoting directly, the king of debt, and that you understood debt better than anyone who had ever lived. So I'd like to explore that understanding tonight, together with documentation." She placed a single sheet from the blue folder on the table between them, oriented so the camera could read the Treasury letterhead. Trump looked at it. He looked at the host. He smiled the smile again, the one that says, "This is theater and I am the only real thing in it." "Look," he said, and his voice carried the particular weariness of a man who has been forced to correct too many stupid people for too long. "The fake news media, and I include certain members of Congress in that category, they have been doing this since day one. Day one. Since before day one, actually. You take a number, you rip it completely out of context, you run it on CNN or wherever, and people who don't know any better believe it. This is what she does. This is what they all do. He gestured vaguely in Crockett's direction. With all due respect, I'm not going to sit here and let someone who's been in Congress for 5 minutes lecture me on fiscal policy. Jasmine Crockett waited for him to finish. She waited 2 full seconds after he finished, which in television time is an eternity, and in those 2 seconds the room was completely still. With respect, she said, and her voice had not changed by a single degree, I've been in Congress long enough to read a Treasury report, and I'd like to ask you about something specific. Before I do, I want to give you the opportunity to confirm something for the record. She looked at him directly. You've stated publicly, repeatedly, and on this network that your administration represents the most fiscally responsible governance in modern American history. Is that an accurate characterization of your position? Trump spread his hands. Absolutely. Totally accurate. Nobody has managed money better than... Thank you, she said, and opened the red-tabbed folder. The red-tabbed folder contained 6 sections. She had marked them before she arrived. The first section was 12 pages, and the top page showed a header from the Congressional Budget Office. She placed it on the table with the gentleness of someone placing something irreplaceable. What you're looking at, she said, is the CBO's independent analysis of discretionary spending trajectories over the past 4 administrations. I want to draw your attention to page 3, where the analysts note, and these are nonpartisan analysts, career economists, the same office that every administration of both parties has relied on for 50 years. They note that the rate of debt accumulation in the current period exceeds the comparable period of every administration in the data set, including the administrations that oversaw the 2008 financial crisis and the COVID pandemic. She turned to page 3 and placed it beside the first page so both were visible. Now, I understand the instinct to call things fake. I really do. But the Congressional Budget Office is not fake. The Treasury Department is not fake. And the numbers they produce are not produced by me, and they are not produced by CNN. She paused. They are produced by the government you run. Trump's jaw tightened. He turned to the host. Can I respond? Because this is exactly what I mean. She comes in here with a stack of papers. Of course, the host said. She comes in here with papers, like that's supposed to be impressive. I've dealt with more paper in my life than she's seen in her entire career. I built an empire on paper. I know what documents mean, and I know what they're designed to do, and what this is designed to do is make it look like there's something wrong when there's nothing wrong. His voice was climbing incrementally, almost imperceptibly, towards something louder. The economy is booming. Jobs are up. The stock market, have you seen what the stock market has done? Nobody talks about that. Crockett waited for him to finish. She uncapped her pen and wrote something in her notepad. Then she looked up. The stock market has done a number of things, she said. I'd like to talk about some of them. But first, I'd like to show you something from your own words. She opened the gold-tabbed folder and removed a single laminated page. This is a transcript. It's from a 2019 interview. In it, you stated, and I'm reading directly, that a president should be held personally responsible for the performance of the American economy under his watch. No excuses. No blame shifting. Responsible. End quote. She placed the laminate on the table, your words in 16-point font, visible and inarguable. I believe in holding people to their own stated standards. I think that's fair. I think you'd agree that's fair. On 8 seconds of silence, the host shifted in his chair. Somewhere behind the camera, something moved. Trump looked at the laminate. He looked at it the way a man looks at something he knows is real but needs one more second to calculate his distance from. That was a completely different context, he said finally. Totally different. Tell me the context, Crockett said. Look, it's a general principle. A general principle of leadership. You're taking a general principle of leadership and weaponizing it. I'm applying it, she said, to the precise situation it describes. And she did not move. Her jacket was smooth. Her hands were flat on the table. If a president should be held personally responsible for the economic performance under his watch, and the documented economic indicators I've placed in front of you show a specific pattern, then the standard you articulated in 2019 produces a specific conclusion. I didn't write the standard. You did. Trump turned to the host again, and this time there was something in the turn that was not quite as confident as the turns before it. This is why people don't watch these kinds of interviews. This is a gotcha operation. It's your words, Crockett said, from your interview. On camera, as she opened the red folder's third section, she placed 3 pages on the table in sequence as if laying out cards. Each page showed a different set of figures, and she walked through them with the pace of someone who has rehearsed this for reasons that have nothing to do with performance and everything to do with the knowledge that precision is the only thing that cannot be deflected. She spoke about manufacturing employment figures. She spoke about the comparative wage growth data across the bottom 2 income quintiles in the first quarters of 4 consecutive administrations. She spoke about a specific set of tariff-related cost increases that had been documented by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And she cited the report number and the publication date, and she cited it the way a doctor cites a test result. Not to impress, but because the citation is the thing that makes the fact a fact. Trump attempted the deflection 4 separate times in the space of 10 minutes. He called the Federal Reserve politically compromised. He raised the name of a Democratic congressperson from a state he did not specify. He stated that the real unemployment rate, the one the mainstream media refused to publish, was the lowest in the history of the world. Each time Crockett waited, and each time when he was finished, she placed the next piece of documented evidence on the table between them and said simply, "Let me show you something." She had not raised her voice once. By the time she reached the third folder, the thick one, the one that had been sitting on her right since before he arrived, Trump was gripping the edge of the desk. His left hand was visible in the camera frame, and his knuckles showed the particular pallor of a man maintaining control by physical force. His face had moved through 2 distinct color changes, and the production team had made no effort to correct it in the lighting. The host was very quiet. She opened the thick folder. Inside was a section she had marked with a plain white tab, no color, just the handwritten word, beneficiaries. "I want to talk about the tax policy," she said, "because I think it's the clearest illustration of the principle you articulated in 2019. Fiscal responsibility, personal accountability. Who benefits? No, she placed a comparative analysis on the table, a side-by-side breakdown sourced from the Tax Policy Center and the Joint Committee on Taxation of distributional effects across income brackets. When we look at where the documented benefits of the 2025 tax framework flow in percentage terms as a share of after-tax income, and she ran her finger down the right column, the top 1% of earners receive a benefit approximately 47 times greater proportionally than the bottom 20%. She looked up. "I want to be accurate. That number is from the Joint Committee on Taxation. That is not a Democratic organization. That is Congress's own nonpartisan scorekeeper." So Trump opened his mouth. "I'm not finished," she said, and something in the evenness of those 3 words closed his mouth again. "I want to add one more piece of context, because context matters to you, as you've noted." She reached into the folder and removed a single printed page. Different paper, plain, no government letterhead, a printout of something that had clearly come from a different kind of source. "This is a letter. It was sent to my office. The family asked me to share it, and I want to read a portion of it because I think it represents what all of these numbers actually mean when you strip away the data and look at a human life." The studio was completely quiet. She read from the letter. It was from a woman in Ohio, 63 years old, a retired manufacturing supervisor who had worked for the same company for 31 years. The letter described what happened to her pension. It described what happened to her prescription costs in the 18 months following a specific policy change she named by its legislative designation. It described her daughter, who had moved back into her house at 34, and her son-in-law, who was working 2 jobs, and her 3 grandchildren, who shared a bedroom because the family could no longer afford the house they had been renting. She wrote without self-pity. She wrote as someone reporting facts because she needed someone to understand that the facts had consequences. Crockett finished reading and placed the letter on the table. No one spoke. 15 seconds. The only sound was the ambient hum of the studio equipment and, somewhere distant, the faint noise of the building's ventilation system. Trump's hand had released the edge of the table. He was looking at the letter. He was not looking at Crockett. His expression had passed through the far side of the controlled anger he had been deploying for 40 minutes and arrived somewhere less legible, somewhere that in another man might have been discomfort, might have been recognition, might have been something approaching the proximity of shame. The host said very quietly, "Mr. President, did you want to respond?" 23 seconds. The camera held on Trump's face and nothing moved and the room did not breathe. And Jasmine Crockett sat in her chair with her hands flat on the table and her eyes on the man across from her with the patience of someone who has been waiting for this moment through every dismissal, every interruption, every sideways glance that said she was furniture. 23 seconds is a very long time in a television studio. It is long enough for an audience to understand everything they need to understand without a single additional word being spoken. "That's a very sad story," Trump said finally. His voice had changed. The weariness was still there, but it was a different kind of weariness now, the kind that is not weaponized but simply present. "But I can't be responsible for every sad story in America." She didn't ask you to be responsible for her story," Crockett said. "She asked you to be responsible for the policy." She paused. "The policy you designed, the policy you signed, the policy that, by the documented distributional analysis of your own Congress's nonpartisan scorekeeper, directed the greatest share of its benefits to the people who needed them least." She looked at him steadily. "You said in 2019 that a president should be held personally responsible. No excuses. No blame shifting." She let that sit. "I have one question, and I'd like an answer if that's possible." Trump looked at her. His hands were in his lap now, out of the camera frame. "The woman in Ohio," Crockett said. The 63-year-old woman, 31 years at the same company, 3 grandchildren in 1 bedroom. If she came to you right now and asked you directly whether the policies you signed were designed with her in mind, what would you say to her? The silence that followed was not a television pause. It was not a rhetorical device. It was a powerful man sitting across from a prepared woman who had spent 40 minutes placing documented reality on a table between them and finding that he had nothing left that could reach across that table and make the documents go away. It was the sound of a room that understood before he did that there was no good answer to the question, not because the question was a trap, but because the truth on this particular night had been too completely established to navigate around. 10 seconds. 15. He said, "She'd be better off under my economy than under theirs." Crockett looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once with the deliberate gravity of someone closing a case file she has been building for a very long time. "She voted for you," Crockett said. Twice." She began collecting her folders slowly, with the same care she had used when placing them. She stacked them in a precise column, the blue tab visible on top. She picked up her pen. She put the cap on, and then she looked at the camera, not at the host, not at Trump, but at the camera, at the audience beyond it, at the 63-year-old woman in Ohio and the millions of people like her who are watching this on a screen somewhere, who have been watching this their whole lives, waiting for someone to ask the question that has no good answer and stay seated in the silence that comes after. "Earlier tonight," she said, "before we went live, I was told, not by you directly, but I was made aware that this format was considered manageable, that I'd be an easy counterpoint." She paused. "I've spent 20 years being an easy counterpoint. I've been dismissed in county courtrooms and state legislatures and congressional hearing rooms and national television studios, and every single time I came with my folders and my documents and my numbers, and I sat in my chair and I waited." As she looked at Trump one final time, "The presidency is not above accountability. The documented record is not partisan, and the woman in Ohio is not a sad story. She is a constituent, she is a citizen, and she deserves a government that governs for her." She stood. Her jacket was perfectly smooth. She picked up her folders in one arm, shook the host's hand with the other, and walked to the studio exit with the particular unhurried calm of someone who left everything they brought on the table. Behind her, in the chair where he had leaned back with such supreme certainty 90 minutes ago, Donald Trump sat looking at nothing in particular, at the space where the folders had been, at the letter from the woman in Ohio still lying on the table between them, at the camera that was still recording, at the room that had been 30 seconds ago entirely his, and was now, in every sense that mattered, no longer anything of the kind.